Hello, everyone. Is the Economancer. Come, take a walk with me into the Economicon as we discuss whether Frederick Hayek was a cybernetician. So, really, today we're going to be talking about this question that I think everyone should ponder. What was the influence of cybernetics on Frederick Hayek? So, the reason why this question is important is because at the time of Hayek, there was a strong and influential basis in the social sciences towards cybernetics. This first started with John von Neumann and his work on game theory and economic decisions, right? Neumann was one of the founding members of the Cybernetic Society, and game theory was essentially an extrapolation of cybernetic control systems in decision making processes. And then he applied it to the economic field. So one of the notable influences on Hayek is detailed in his book, The Sensory Order, that put both human and economic systems that are governed by similar basic principles, which allows them to be understood under some general framework. And he also stated that they were complex systems. And so when we think about complex systems and stuff like that, we always jump back into cybernetics. And what is cybernetics most often is typically it's often associated with information or communication. So that is why we have this battle between Habermas and Luhmann. Um, so we have this idea of the autopoetic recursive communication system versus the theory of communicative action. One of these days, I'm going to end up doing a video on that debate because I think it's hands down one of the best debates that you can get a hold of. Okay. So, how did this influence Hayek? First, we need to kind of get an idea of what it is to understand Hayek and his views of the market as a system, and that prices are functions of the market that transmit information about production and consumption. So, we have this market that is a system that has functions for information loops, feedbacks, drifts, and nonlinear equilibrium states, right? So, that's an equilibrium that's always teetering off of the equilibrium state, right? So even though it's a steady state, it's moving from point A to point B, always crossing C, which is the equilibrium. Okay, so he also has it that the system is self-regulating and autopoetic sometimes. And so autopoetic or autopoiesis refers to a system capable of reproducing and maintaining itself by creating its own parts and eventually further components. So that's kind of an interesting position about what economics is, and that he had reflexivity into his economics. So there are various ideas of reflexivity, and they revolve around self-reference, self-production, self-analysis, circularity. They're typically associated with closed systems, autonomous, and recursive. Now, this goes back to some of the stuff that we've talked about on Luhmann versus Parsons. Parsons had it, the system is open. Luhmann had it as operationally closed, and that's why Luhmann has it as autopoetic, whereas Parsons has social action. Okay, so now not all cyberneticians think that capitalist market economies, however you want to call it, laissez-faire, etc., follows this systemic evaluation. Many of them openly disagree and say that an apparent instability of the market shows that it is an absolute failure in regards to cybernetic control. However, many of these cyberneticians, they also think that the emergent properties of the market are negatives because you cannot control the market. And so it fails to be a proper cybernetic system, right? So this kind of comes down to this idea of control, right? And this is where Hayek is unbelievably important in a lot of the arguments against, authority or centralization. Okay, so instead of looking at cybernetics, he actually jumps over to general systems theory, and he looks at how open systems do not exhibit a fixed structure that's regulated by negative feedback, because he said an economy is a system that's typically regulated by negative feedback, which doesn't mean like you smack the economy and it acts right. It means that the process negatively regulates itself. And that's why he's kind of looked at as like an evolutionary economist as well, because he's saying, okay, so we don't have this regulated by negative feedback, but there are evolutionary search processes that can reach some goal. So that's how we have the positive feedback of these evolutionary search processes that is regulated by these negative feedbacks in the system. Okay, so why does this matter? Because essentially, what individuals want has nothing to do with what the market is trying to do. The market is simply allocating resources, and as we're looking at all these individual actors in the economy, they simply function as some conduits to transmit this information of goods and services. And they don't even know what that information means or what the end goal is for the market to function. They just have to respond to the local economic incentives, and the total systemic result will be some purposeful economic coordination. And this is what he referred to, and what many refer to as the invisible hand of Adam Smith, which is hilarious because that's a strong form of second order cybernetics, even though it's not as radical as some second order cyberneticians have, but that's essentially what it is. Now, this raises the question about Schumpeter's work, because he was also an Austrian, just not so much in the Austrian business cycle. In his work on creative destruction, or how innovation destroys portions of the markets to facilitate the growth of new industries or firms, something we've talked about thousands of times here, that evolutionary perspective. So what does this not lead to the idea that the evolutionary tendencies that and the tendencies be of the market by positive feedback, right? So we have this positive feedback that we're talking about on these social search, or these evolutionary search processes. How does that not become just explosive, rather than just, the negative feedback? We're finding better structures in which to engage in this negative regulation. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but essentially think of it this way. Under this guise of Schumpeter, we have this innovative destruction, so this creative destruction. How does this not just defy all logic and just go, trying not to cuss, how does this not just go to exponential craziness, right? Well, my response to some of these criticisms are fairly simple: that under ideal initial conditions, the economic fluctuations of the system do maintain and will maintain this continued equilibration. Now, it's not that the market is in equilibrium, is that the market is always functioning towards equilibrium on each individual case. So just because one firm dies and another firm comes in, that doesn't move the market out of equilibrium. It destroys that individual subsystem, which is called functional differentiation, right? That we've talked about a lot. So that functional differentiation continues and continues and continues until a subsystem becomes a system in and of itself. And then we have, that debate between Parsons and Luhmann on how those systems interact. But essentially, the emergent properties that are facilitated by this evolutionary search process, they do not functionally allow for, or they do functionally self-regulate, and they allow for the continued functional differentiation of the market. And in my opinion, it's fairly easy to combine the work of Hayek and Parsons, as both points to functions on the higher control as an approach to institutionalization, right? So that's the higher up you go, you have this institutionalization process that kind of flows down. That's why we have top-down hierarchies, and that when you go from the bottom up, it makes sense, but there has to be feedback down, right? And so this is something that they both integrate into the work. And then you have like the idea of like occupational differentiation as an emergence of specialized organization, but the differentiation of new forms is a separation of these analytically distinct functions. And this kind of gets rid of some of the ideas of these historically fused structural orders, right? So that each new task must be renewed differently. So all the issues that you had in the past, they are being destroyed. That's fine. We want to get away from them. That's why we're moving forward. And so, given an example of this differentiation between now, we have this idea that there's a variety of full-time specialist jobs, and they imply a high level of training and education that people will complete through this specialized tasks. So this collection of specialized tasks. So one of the big things is with all of the postmodern and critical theory attacks on modernity, we find this process of institutionalization is also the process of social integration. The social integration and market-based purposeful economic coordination without centralization allows for society to evolve beyond petty problems because both of them, Parsons and Hayek, seen that this structural differentiation takes place along these functional lines, and that each of these functions that sustain a system can be more effectively performed over time as society or the economy become more efficient and more caring. Because modernization or modernity is the consolidation of larger and larger populations into more and more of the system through this institutionalization of modern culture. Now, I know this sounds crazy, and I know a lot of people are going to have some similar, issues with this, as the critical theorists and all that have. Whoa, man! Now we're trying to deplete everyone's, role in society down to these things, and it's just like it doesn't work like that. The idea is fairly simple. So we have issues within society. Let's say they are racism, sexism, so on and so forth. A lot of market-based economists have pointed to over time that these things are not good for a marketplace. So the marketplace will try to get rid of these as quickly as possible. This is the same thing that Parsons said. Because as that system continues to differentiate, it has to integrate as it's differentiating. Wild, I know. But that's because for the division of labor to continue, you have to bring in more people. And this is one of those criticisms about why we're having problems with economic growth and stuff, because we're having lower amounts of population growth that you've heard me talk about. So, boom, there we go. That's a big problem. But the system itself integrates people, says, okay, I don't care what you look like. I don't care what's between your legs. I really don't care. I'm going to integrate you into my system, and then we can move forward. Hilariously enough, this goes into some of the work that's done by the Unabomber. And I know, wild, Ted Kaczynski, he talked about how the system integrates everyone, and how he hated that the system integrates everyone into this cybernetic control system, and that over time we're all just going to be not even individuals, we're just going to be one. But my answer to that was the unity of difference, what I think is unbelievably important. I think it's something that had Hayek worked with Luhmann, which I don't know if they had ever had conversations, or Parsons, I think he would have looked into this unity of difference and seen that absolutely this consistent division of labor, these consistent functional differentiations that allow modernity to continue down this track of beauty, right? And what I mean by that is that modernity allows you to do all kinds of things that you couldn't have imagined 100 years ago. You can have a great group of friends, this diverse set of friends, this diverse set of epistemological approaches to everything that happens in life. You have wisdom not from just the West, but you have wisdom from the East, and all of these things integrate. And I think that that is the power of modernity. Now, a lot of people point to that it's neoliberalism, that it's the commodification and the reification of all of these things that is the problem, because it just forces everything into a box of an individual. But the problem is modernity allows for more now than ever differentiation from your peers, and yet still be accepted. And that is the fundamental power behind what Hayek was trying to point towards, was saying, look, it doesn't matter your arguments against it. The functional differentiation over time allows for people to be more different now than ever. I mean, this the continued postmodern critique itself allows for this to be true. This is something that I've thought about for some time. A lot of these postmodern critiques, they actually take modernism and say, well, it's doing this, therefore that's bad. But that's wild. That's what we wanted in the first place. We wanted this functional differentiation of society to the point that everything becomes an individual process, which was the ultimate goal that was moving towards modernity and neoliberalism and stuff like that. Was that everybody's different, everybody gets to be happy, we're integrated into a system that makes life easier, especially for those in the West. And in time, I'm going to take a guess and say that it's going to also help everyone else. So when people give you these criticisms of modernity and all of this, just point to the fact that Hayek had produced a very good idea on how this functional differentiation in our society leads to society to coming to better outcomes by not having centralization, by not having force put on them, but by coming to the conclusion, irrespective of every individual's feelings, that every individual gets to act out how they want, but it's still economically purposeful without anyone being involved, but everyone's involved. And that is, to me, the most important part of modernization and modernity, and why we should defend it against all of the criticisms and attacks that come from critical theory, as well as postmodern theory, and so on and so forth. Now, with this, I know this episode was a little wild. That was because there's a lot to crack open into this, and one day I may sit down and go through it a little bit more in depth, but I think I'm running high on time. 16 minutes. So I think with this, I'm going to cut it short. Down below, tell me what you think of this, because I think overall, I think this is a general idea that I'm trying to get out there, and something that I'm going to work on more in the defense of modernity. That actually might be a set of videos that I'm going to be working towards. And then the public process videos are going to be they're going to be coming out probably next week, probably Tuesday through Friday. Monday or tomorrow or whatever day, if you're watching this, there's going to be a live stream coming soon between me and Nelsonomics. We're going to be talking about the functionality of kinship. So it's going to be related to families, whether we need to care about the modern family per se. So has there been a problem in society because we've gone to this modern family dynamic, which is just, it's a very closed form of family, right? It's your immediate family, not so much caring about the clan or the kinship. How was that benefited or not benefited society? Has it allowed for increased differentiation? Has it decreased differentiation because your circle's smaller, and where friend groups are much broader than it was family groups 200 years ago? So that's probably going to be the next episode. And then, like I said, after that, we're going to get into the public policy processes. And that's going to be looking at first, we're going to be looking at the three forms of institutional or neo-institutional work. That will be sociological institutional, neoclassical institutional, or we'll just call it economic institutionalism. So we may be looking at some stuff by North and Acemoglu. And then the third, we're going to be looking at historical institutionalization and how those all three are used in understanding the public policy process. And with that, thank you for taking a walk with me through the Economicon. You have a good day.